That's new.
What's new?
It says it gives you the option when you come in that says recording in progress. Do you want to continue, or do you want to leave? And then I say continue, and then I come in, and it'll give me it'll give me a voice that says recording in progress. So it's just kind of new. Am I okay? Should I change?
No, you're okay.
My background okay, or should I do a virtual?
No, your background's good. I'm squishy.
Okay, I'm gonna grab a drink.
Hi, Chante.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, just busy.
Oh, how's it going with Ruben?
Good, he just started today at the office. He's pretty good, pretty helpful.
That's good.
He'll be on too. He wants to help. He said he could help host too if we're not able to.
Okay. Awesome. You know what? I didn't grab Reynolds' bio.
Oh, I have a bio for him.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Chante.
Yeah, well, because Ruben used to be his intern.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so Ruben got it for me.
That's awesome. Do you want Ruben to do the intro and then just do the, like, just his bio part?
He can. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I can introduce Ruben as, our new intern, and then I'll have Ruben introduce Reynolds.
Yep. And then, do you know if Kellen's going to be on?
I haven't even talked to Kellen. I know he's in Pier today at the redistricting committee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How is, well, I guess we can talk later. We should have a call tomorrow.
That sounds, we're going to be in Rapid tomorrow. We can still call, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe you should come by the office.
Do you think that'll be, we're taking our cat that got beat up, she's not getting better. So we're taking her vet. Yeah. They told us to bring her back. So, do you think we'll have time to run to the office, or?
Yeah, why not?
I guess too, it depends on how she's doing tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay though. I just wanted to visit.
Yeah, no, it'd be great though to visit. It feels like it's just a lot to do, and
I know.
Yeah. So.
Well, I seen they extended your contract
For another month. Yep.
Nice.
I know.
I hope you stay on. I want them to put you on full time.
Yeah. I got to tell you some stuff.
I know. That's why I wanted to chat with you later.
Okay. Oh, and we have the Build Back Better meeting after. If we get.
Know.
Are you part of that? Did you get an invite to that, honey?
No, I'm not important enough.
Oh my God.
Whatever.
Like you guys are.
Well.
I'm just on the bench, coach.
Should I let Reynolds in? I'll let him in.
Yeah, let him in.
Okay.
Hi, Reynolds. Senator.
Hello, you can call me Reynolds.
Hello, Reynolds. How are you?
I am not as prepared as I would like to be.
Oh, yeah.
I will do my best.
You'll be okay.
We're not mean.
I will be okay. This is one of those things that I wrote a dissertation about discrimination in mortgage lending and have written about inequality in mortgage lending, and it's been something I've been thinking about for almost 30 years. So
Yeah.
I can talk about this. That's why it so ticks me off. Is
Just comes natural to you.
This does. This is actually the governor hitting a really infringing on the intellectual freedom of our faculty members and just scaring them, because there's no way you can't ban a set of ideas. I mean, you can't do critical race theory. Well, I mean, can you talk about the Fort Laramie Treaty? Like,
right?
Can you talk about slavery? Can you talk about Jim Crow laws? Can you talk about how the old discrimination in lending has created new kinds of discrimination in lending, and how old housing segregation has caused new kinds of discrimination? So we have things to talk about.
Oh, good.
Will anybody come? That's always the question. You sign up to do an event, and then I always wonder, is it just us? Will Remy say anything, or is he just going to look there, looking very handsome, looking into the future?
I know, look how majestic he looks.
How about now?
There he is.
I put on my specs.
The other picture is better, man.
I'm sitting in my teepee right now, wondering why you can't teach about races.
Puts his glasses up.
Hello, Reynolds. Nice to see you this evening.
But and again, let's just embrace the weirdness of we're bringing a white guy to talk about racism. What does he know?
I understand it does seem weird, but trust me, this kind of weirdness fits in with the issue that we as Native Americans have to address every single day on every single issue. Whether it's I just went through Dairy Queen earlier today to buy some food for a grieving family, and it's said on the box that we order from with the speaker on it. There's a sign that says, if you want to get your city taxes taken off, you must tell us while you're placing your order now and show your tribal ID when you get to the window. And I see that every single time I go through that, because on a reservation here in Eagle Butte, because of the tax agreement we have with the state, tribal members don't have to pay the city tax, right? Because the tribe doesn't collect a portion of that city tax because we don't have a tax agreement with the city. And so, but it just goes to show that at what point are we not, at what point are we not going to talk about that stuff when I have to talk about it when I order a cheeseburger?
Wow. And
so, while this issue is not in the front lobe of everybody else, it is for people of color. Because when we have to make that determination when we're ordering a cheeseburger, that just exemplifies that those are decisions we're making every single day on every single level when it comes to everything from healthcare to where we're going to travel to, how we're going to get there. People avoid certain places, and I know this is not really talking in a critical race theory, but I just want to bring it up that if people are tired of hearing about critical race theory, imagine what it's like being a person of color, having race be an issue every single day. And so I think, so just so you know, that this is a recorded program, so we end up talking, a lot of our caucus members and people will end up seeing this later on down the road. So I just wanted to bring up that point, and I didn't want to kick off our discussion on that. But I mean, you're talking about it's being weird, but reality, I think it fits into the weirdness of our daily lives and the things that we have to do to make everything better for all of us. So, right.
And okay. I just acknowledge that I know something about this as a scholar, but as a white cisgender guy, I know that I have privilege and I'm aware of some of it, but
okay, well, let's continue the conversation. I'm gonna let everyone in. It's after 5 here, so
my fault.
Let's continue the conversation with everyone else.
Is that Sydney Swenson at South Dakota Democratic Party?
Yes.
Hey, Sydney Swenson.
Hello, Reynold Nesta. How are you?
I am well. It's great to see everybody else here, including Ruby Engelhardt.
Yes, well, that's who I wanted to introduce you to, our new intern who
Oh,
just
congratulations.
started this past week.
Awesome. Who recommended him? Did anybody give him a recommendation?
Someone did.
I didn't.
Pretty familiar in the party. He's
Wonder who it could be.
Yeah, he knows people.
Right.
I've heard.
Maybe I did actually have a conversation with Nikki about him at some point. It was so long ago I'd forgotten. But for those who don't know, Ruben was my intern during the legislative session, and I admire him and I'm grateful to him. And we did some really great work together. And I hope he comes back and do it again one more time.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Chante Hart. I am the Native Outreach and West River Field Director for the South Dakota Democratic Party. And it's an honor to see all of you here this evening. Thank you for joining us. We're honored to have you here. And we're also honored to have Senator Reynold Nesba with us this evening. And before we get started, I would like to ask our Lekshi Rami to start us off with a good prayer. And you're on mute, Rami. We can't hear your prayers.
Oh, I was praying in my head. No, okay. So I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and thank you for allowing me to say a quick prayer. Tunkashla, Tunkashla, heche, Tunkashla epetu kile, michante kimi chiuskaye, heche tohani toka, wayasu ki al, wahinaji ki imaya kukta. Tunkashla, wichoni mitawa kia, empetu wanji ake miku. Hion wopila ichichie, michante ki ichie atoha. How Mitake Oyas.
Thank you, Rami. And at first I'd like to introduce Rami. He is one of our caucus members and one of our, he's kind of like our community uncle and older brother. But we always value his opinion and his guidance. So those of you that don't know Rami, this is Rami Beautiful Bald Eagle. And also his beautiful wife, Elena Beautiful Bald Eagle, who works for us and is an awesome writer. And then also I would like to introduce our newest staff member, our intern, Ruben. And Ruben, I was wondering if you would like to introduce our guest this evening.
Oh, okay. Give me 1 sec.
And also we have Sydney Swenson on who is also our staff too. Hi, Sydney. But Ruben, I'll let you introduce our guest this evening. And thank you for joining us, everyone.
Of course. So Reynold Nesba is our South Dakota Senator from District 15. He has a PhD in economics from the University of Notre Dame. Currently, he is a professor of economics at Augustana, where he has taught for the last 26 years, pushing for Medicaid expansion, the protection of ballot measures, and a prominent member of the Committee of Appropriations. We warmly welcome him.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that, Ruben and Chante, and I'm just honored to be here. I think I'll say a few words, and then I'm really hoping we can just have a conversation. As I confessed with some of with Chante and Elena and Remy before we got started, is that, you know, here it is, another white guy talking, a straight white guy talking about issues of diversity. And I do come to this, what I bring to this is some academic understanding. I don't understand this from a lived experience perspective. And that's what I'm hoping that you can all help me with, that these are issues that you've dealt with over, you know, many of you have dealt with over your lifetimes, and you can help me. So I'm hoping this is a two-way conversation. I'm not coming as this great font of knowledge, but I do come with some irritation. So let me start with that. There's two things I think that the reason that Chante invited me today was that The Joint Committee on Appropriations, 2 Tuesdays ago, I've served on that committee now for 5 years. And on my last day of class, I had to leave a little early. So I was in the committee meeting from 8 o'clock in the morning until about 12:30. And I had to run to teach a class at 1 o'clock. And I logged back in after that, and the meeting had come to an end. And what I hadn't noticed was that there was a letter of intent that I think it slipped in after the deadline, because I had looked at all of the other letters of intent, but it was a letter, it was drafted by Senator Maher up there, who represents you all in Eagle Butte. You should maybe reach out and chat with him about that. But the letter does a couple of things. One, it was addressed to the Board of Regents, and it said, it was written to the Department of Education and asking them to do a couple of things. One, to don't apply for any grants for civics education. Now, civics education is something we've been talking about for years in South Dakota. It was something that Governor Noem has talked about. I was on a bipartisan bill with Senator Bolin a couple of years ago, talking about how to do a better job of civics education. How do you get young people in high school, involved and engaged in the process? And what that letter said is you can't do something called Action Civics. I'm not sure what that is. It might mean you can't put your kids on a bus and take them to Pier to watch the legislature in session, right? Or it might be every year I get, letters from 3rd or 4th or 5th graders that are writing letters. To me, that sounds like Action Civics, when people are actually engaged with their legislature, and they're asking, telling the Department of Education to not encourage that or apply to any grants that would do that. And I just think it's problematic because they don't define their terms. Second thing is, then we had this letter from, or this press release coming from Governor Noem on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. The most important thing she had to talk about on the anniversary of George Floyd's murder was to say we cannot talk about critical race theory in our K-12 education, or particularly in our Board of Regents. She wanted an investigation into that to see if we're spending any money on critical race theory. And I find this problematic for a number of reasons. That when you have a governor or a legislature telling a Board of Regents what to do, or telling faculty what to do, all they're trying to do is chill the intellectual climate, basically to deny intellectual freedom or academic freedom to the way that faculty are going to be teaching in their classrooms, right? I mean, one definition of this is just, when you ask what is critical race theory, if you ask Google, it will tell you it's an academic movement of scholars and activists who seek to critically examine the law as it intersects with issues of race to challenge mainstream liberal approaches to racial justice. Oftentimes refers to people like Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, but there could be other people, right? I mean, there's this is a pretty great book on the color of law, A Forgotten History of How Government Segregated America by Richard Rothstein. A whole compendium of things on critical race theory. I've just started on this one. And when they tell you you can't do critical race theory, I right away took an article that I had written back and published in 2003, and I sent it to Dr. Jones, who is the head of the South Dakota Historical Society. He had been the head of the Department of Education. And I also sent it over to the Secretary of Tiffany Sanderson, the Secretary of Education, just said, would this article count as critical race theory? Is this an idea that you're banning? So are my ideas so dangerous that nobody at our Board of Regents institutions could be talking about it? There's a couple of other authors on the piece. It was published in a good sociology journal. It was funded by the National Science Foundation. But what the title of the article is The Changing Face of Inequality. And what my two co-authors and I talk about is the way that segregation had led to a particular kind of discrimination in mortgage lending for people to get housing. And what it used to look like was that Blacks would get denied mortgages. So blacks at the same income as whites would get denied mortgages at have a denial rate 2 or 3 times higher than, or people applying, even white people applying to get a mortgage in a low income or minority neighborhood were getting denied mortgages more often. But in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, what started to happen is we used credit scores. Right? You maybe know about your credit score or see an update from that. And what that allows banks to do is, rather than denying you credit, what it does is say, oh yeah, we can make you a loan. You know, we can get you a mortgage loan at 10% or 12% or, you know, at a much higher rate. And so the new face of inequality is that minority borrowers, rather than getting denied credit, get credit at a much higher rate, much higher fee, and with loans that can't be prepaid. Right? So it's just an inferior product. The other thing that happens is, we saw in our research in the early 2000s, was that more people of color were buying manufactured housing, and the loans were going for those, which can be a problematic form of housing, depending on how it gets connected to the foundation. And so what I worry about is that you're saying you're banning an idea, but she doesn't tell us who's in or who's out, right? So can you teach a particular idea or a particular, so what people and what ideas are in or out? And then it's also not clear who decides, right? Is there going to be some sort of, well, these ideas are un-American, so we're going to have an un-American committee to see if these ideas are dangerous. And if you get selected by the un-American committee, then your ideas or that article or that book is something that can't be taught at our regential institutions. And then the third thing is, what's the penalty, right? So if somebody is found to be teaching ideas that are dangerous, because you're talking about the Fort Laramie Treaty and broken treaty rights, or you're talking about this sales tax issue that Remy was talking about before we all got started here today, about even how you work out tax issues, because in South Dakota, even sales tax agreements are racially based, in part because of the tribal tax agreements that they have with states and municipalities. And then it's just even chilling in terms of the conversation. I mean, what if a student raises a question about a Jim Crow law, or raises a question about segregation or criminal justice policies, or just the legacy of slavery? I mean, our colleges need to be a place where there is open and free debate. And sometimes I've had debates with some of my liberal friends that have been prone to sometimes protest against, or a conservative speaker coming to campus. I was less than thrilled with Oliver North being invited to Augustana University years ago. This wasn't over issues of race. I just thought that he had broken the law, and that, selling arms to the Ayatollah to overthrow the democratically elected government of Nicaragua wasn't something that was consistent with our values as an institutions at Augustana. But it's a whole different story. So this movement across the country to try and stifle debate is really deeply problematic. And again, if you're Kristi Noem and you are trying to, what's your goal, right? What's your goal? And I'm going to ask this honestly to all of you. What is the governor's goal by, on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, coming out against critical race theory? Who's she trying to talk to?
I say her base. Yep, exactly like John McNaughton said. Obviously, she's pandering to her base and hoping that her base will take action and enlarge in itself based on that particular attack.
And I think that's it. I mean, I've just taken to viewing our governor, of everything she does, as trying to lift her national profile and to raise money. We used to talk about racial dog whistles, right? About talking about states' rights, or the lost cause, right? In terms of Confederate support, and really a support for segregation. But on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death to come out against critical race theory, I mean, that's not a dog whistle. I mean, that's an audible whistle to say, hey, if you are a white nationalist somewhere in America, you know, I'm your candidate. You should be sending me a check, right? Because I'm the one standing up for white people and white nationalism. And that is, I mean, as a white progressive-minded person, I find that frightening, and I can only imagine what that feels like for people of color across the country in South Dakota. I see a post here from John McNaughton. Yeah, they've started saying the quiet parts out loud and no one is being punished for it. And oftentimes it isn't even anybody speaking out against it. And this is in South Dakota. I mean, in Sioux Falls, I represent a district. When I moved here 26 years ago, the Sioux Falls School District was 90% white and 10% diverse. It's now 60% white and 40% diverse, and it's becoming 1 or 2% more diverse every year. So in another 5 or 10 years, we're going to have a majority diverse school district. And if you want to keep your institutions open, you want to keep Black Hills State open, you want to keep Northern State open, if you're going to do that, you're going to have a lot more people of color being admitted and being successful, because the number of white high school students is flat or declining, right? The growth even in Sioux Falls is going to be among our diverse population, that we have about the same number, a little bit bigger, about the same number though of white students graduating every year as we did 25 years ago. The growth has really been among people of color. And we need people of color to succeed in South Dakota. We need them to be embraced. We need them to be successful. They are our future. They are going to be our future leaders. They are going to be that labor market. And you can't just say that we can't talk about racial issues. We really need to be able to talk about race in South Dakota, and simply saying that some ideas are out of bounds is just problematic. And the other thing, let me ask another question. How do we respond to this? I mean, I'm going to continue my, speaking out against this, but how else do we push back against Governor Noem? And I'm also going to fix my blinds here and change my lighting. So that's the question. How do we push back against this this notion that she's putting forward?
Well, that was honestly one of my biggest questions I wanted to ask from you tonight. And obviously, right, like JP says, we organize and we speak out, and that is one way to go. But it also one of the things that I've noticed is that there's carryover in what they're attacking. They're not just attacking critical race theory, but when you talked about that letter that Maher sent, he's talking about no action civics. And to me, action civics isn't just taking students to see a legislative session. Action civics is a student body collective. Action civics is a senior class president. Because these individuals actively engage with an elected school board sometimes. And when you're talking about not engaging in action civics, you're talking about not even letting students do mock trials or things like that in the classroom. And I don't know about you, but I think those tools are crucial to help children or a student understand what happens during a trial, what happens during a legislative session, and at what point is that going to be stopped? It is, and I know that there's a precedent for students who actively engage in politics on social media, but does this open another Pandora's box in South Dakota? And to me, the only way, obviously, to stop any of this is to organize in every county, in every jurisdiction, having a party that's going to speak out, stand up, and elect people out of office, like Senator Maher, who isn't just attacking critical race theory, but attacking the students' ability to organize themselves, even politically within their institution. So, you're does this keep a student from going out and helping other people register to vote? Does this? What are the restrictions here? It's awful vague, and the reality is, if we're going to stand up against this, we need to have elected officials in those jurisdictions that can legally challenge this rash behavior, and have a school board that's willing to stand up for their students, and take this all the way if they have to. But I really am concerned also about the bleed of not just attacking critical race theory, but attacking teachers and students' ability to teach and learn. And I really think that was, I was hoping you'd be able to answer all the questions this evening about how we're going to do it. But yes, Action Civics to me is a lot more than just a field trip. And but on the other hand, my next question is, if you're not getting funding from this, if you're not getting grants from this, what other way can be threatened? What other funding can get threatened if they perceive you're doing this? And who makes that delineation? Okay, sorry, maybe I asked a little question.
And again, I think that's that's the problem here. That the Joint Committee on Appropriations, and I don't know if you saw the article that Stephen Groves did on that. That Stephen Groves, followed up with an interview, and he even called Chairman Hunoff to ask her what critical race theory was, and he reported that she couldn't define it. But she voted for the letter anyway. And as I said, I had left to go and teach class. The one person who spoke out against it in the meeting was Linda Duba, and then everybody else voted for it. So it passed 16-1 and 1 with my absence being a no vote. So it's, and what they announced by doing that letter was making it clear that there will be legislation in the 2022 session to ban critical race theory, to ban the, any applying for grants from the Biden administration. And it's just short-sighted too, that these are, we could benefit from bolstering our civics education in South Dakota, and then to tell the Department of Education that they can't apply for federal money is just short-sighted and completely political. And of course, how does it? Yeah. Go ahead.
How does this fit in with the governor's declaration that civics is falling behind and that they really need to focus on civics? I mean, how is this? Is this contradictory?
Well, what she thinks of as civics and what we all think of as civics, I think, are different things. She calls it patriotic education, right? And we used to, there was a different time when other countries engage in patriotic education, we used to call it what? What's the word we call it?
Brainwashing.
Or propaganda, right? It's not education, right? That again, in my classroom, what I try to do, if I'm talking about a particular topic, I try to provoke my students or try to frame it in multiple ways to think about. For example, if I'm inflation that we're now talking about in the news, just worried about increases in prices, and inflation is this, is the rate of change in our overall price level. When I talk about it in class, I talk about it from a conservative monetarist perspective having to do with money supply. I talk about it from a more mainstream supply and demand perspective, but I also talk about it from a Marxian perspective and talk about class struggle and how low unemployment makes workers more powerful and makes it easier to push for higher wages or to quit their job and go to another one. And if I always feel like if I just taught one perspective, I would be engaging in indoctrination. I try to teach from multiple perspectives and let students make up their own mind. And I'm pretty confident that most of our other faculty do that. Not entirely. I mean, if there's any bias, anybody want to take anybody want to guess how many Marxists are in the business school at USD? I would imagine the number is zero, right? I mean, I would imagine that we aren't teaching a lot of, socialist or Marxist ideas or talking about class struggle, that if anything, we're teaching that free markets are always good and everybody gets paid exactly what they deserve. And that's an ideological perspective, right? It's one way of thinking about how the world works. It's not the only way to think about how the world works. I see a couple of more posts here in the chat, Remy. Maybe we should take a look at those here. So JP says, an open mind absorbs information. If we close access to our institutions and the ability of our students to think, learn, and absorb every detail, we cheat them and create a generation missing critical thinking. I agree entirely, right? This idea of indoctrination. We need to have we need to have open conversations. And again, all of her. I think what she's really trying to do, what the governor's trying to do, is trying to scare people, and it works. So Dr. Renee Chandler, does anybody know Dr. Renee Chandler? Give me a wave if you know Dr. Renee Chandler, or put a hand up or something. Dr. Chandler was a constituent of mine here in District 15. She worked at USD. She was the head of their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. I have not talked to her since she left, but I know that she left the head of that office at USD and took a job at Oglethorpe in Atlanta, and it's a huge loss. She was also running the South Dakota African American Museum. She had been a leader in gathering signs and just other pieces of evidence from the protest march that we had here a year ago today, or a year ago yesterday, when we had a peaceful protest here in Sioux Falls in response to the killing of George Floyd. And she left. I think, I don't know the details, but I know that there's a vacancy there. And I also know that Taffy Howard, Representative Taffy Howard, and Representative Liz May have routinely been talking about wanting to ban all funding for diversity, equity, and inclusion at any of our institutions. So I know that they had an opening at USD. And so the other day I was talking to folks at USD about that opening, and they had started a search, and most of the applicants all withdrew. Right? And so if you are overtly speaking against critical race theory, you're saying that diversity, equity, inclusion is not important in your state, what happens is your diversity, equity, inclusion people leave, and you're not able to fill the positions. So you don't even have to make the decision at the legislative level, because the governor has chilled the environment in such a way it's really difficult to be able to fill those jobs. She wins already, simply by talking about it. And that's deeply problematic. Again, I think that this is an existential crisis for our universities. If we are not more successful at recruiting and retaining students of color at our universities, universities are going to close. And we need our white students to be able to learn intercultural communication skills, to be able to get along with their Native boss, or their African-American boss, or their Jewish boss, whatever it is. That we need people that can understand and have cross-cultural competencies. And so I see those diversity, equity, inclusion offices as doing really important work. So I'll pause again. I see Carl Peterson posting something there. Carl, can you just maybe say a word or two about what you just put in the chat?
Yeah, that's an article talking about Liz May's bill to cut that $275,000 funding from the Board of Regents, and NOM's response on taking a look at diversity offices and mission creep, she calls it, and specifically singling out USD for their mission creep. And this was also something I know President Griffiths at DSU, I had urged her several times to hire a Native American coordinator within their diversity office. Several years there, the diversity position was empty. They drove away the person who had been working on Native American issues there, filling both the diversity role and the Jumpstart role. We had some grant funding from the feds for a while, but when that dried up, they pretty much drove that off. And I still think that they decided basically to riff that position, the diversity coordinator at DSU, and to put that onto a committee of faculty. And it looks like, that's kind of what they're trying to force at USD as well. And I think many of the small universities, BH and Mines, they also have those similar problems. So it's something that's scary, and that's, yeah.
Yeah, good point. And again, this has been a year where the governor has attacked checkpoints for tribal communities and challenging their ability to have a checkpoint to protect themselves from the virus because the governor wasn't doing anything. This is a year when the governor led an attack on trans female athletes. For those who aren't following along on that, there's been one trans female athlete in the last decade in South Dakota, and there was one other who was denied the ability to play because she was viewed as having an unfair competitive advantage. I think that the existing policy we have is really an excellent one that should be shared. But instead, the governor responded with her executive orders on that, and now she's attacking critical race theory. And again, this ongoing yeah, it sure feels chilling for anybody who isn't white and conservative in South Dakota. And maybe that's, I think that must be her goal, to make, maybe she doesn't want us here.
I think she's made that abundantly clear, that she'd rather import people that agree with her rather than keep us here, of course.
And I see that Remy has his hand up and Betty has her hand up, but I don't really feel like I'm in charge of this. I don't know if Remy or Elena, if one of you want to chair this, and I'll let you go back to this. So
why don't we have Betty go first, since we haven't heard from her yet?
Okay. I'm sitting here in Aberdeen. I'm glad to be a part of this group. Thank you for having it. Hi, Remy and Elena. I'm waiting now for the big push in South Dakota to make it impossible for people to vote and to register to vote. And just, she being our governor, whose name I don't like to use, jumps on every Trump-backed bandwagon that comes along and tries to make it her own. I have no doubt that she's racist. I have no doubt that she's just trying to raise enough money so she can, I think she wants to leave South Dakota. I'd be the first to give her $50 if she would, but I think I'm wandering off here, but I am trying myself to, when I learn of things such as this critical thinking ban, to make it as well known as I can on my social media activities, so that people who may not have time to follow the news or just don't want to, there are a lot of good thinking people just in Aberdeen whom I treasure, because some people don't see all of this stuff is coming at us from all directions at the same time. And I just feel like we're targets, and we have to help each other recognize it, stand up against it. One of the things I do here that is proving very valuable to me personally is I'm an active member in the League of Women Voters. And if you don't know it already, on their national level, they are working for diversity, inclusivity, and education. I never say that right, DEI. Anyway, so they have a lot of resources. We are also working now to get the petitions signed to get the redistricting on the ballot. There's no way we can vote our ways out of this until we can have our representatives chosen by a tripartisan or nonpartisan and an equitable group rather than the people who are already legislators. So I'll be quiet now, but I just wanted to say those few things about what I'm looking at and what I feel like it's important to help other people see and hear.
Well, thank you, Betty. We appreciate you for being an ally and acknowledging that. We'll go to Elena next and then back to Remy.
Thank you, Chante. It's good to see everyone on here. I don't know if this point is I hope it's not lost on everyone here, but it seems like just even tonight we are outnumbered with the number of Indigenous caucus members here, which I'm not angry about. I think sometimes when people of color, when people who are marginalized speak out, our voices are it's easy to dismiss or to be dismissed. And so one of the things I wanted to say is you are all our allies, and you are all our friends, and you are all here in this, and you guys understand what is happening. So one of the things that I would like to ask is for you guys to amplify what's being said here, and to use your voices and to use your privilege in a good way, and to help us battle what is happening, because it is really frustrating, and it is it's easy to get angry with what Governor Noem is doing. But I know that we are not alone in this. And I believe that with organizing and with mobilizing, our voices can be heard, and it should, create transformative change for a South Dakota that is equitable, that is inclusive, and that welcomes all people. So I'm really happy to see everyone here. And so that's what I wanted to say. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the letter that was sent out to the Department of Education came from Senator Ryan Maher, who is a representative. When you look at his district, it is gerrymandered. And part of his district is the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation. And that's another thing that we have to tackle is redistricting to where it benefits and it's representative of all people. We as the Dewey County Democratic Party, Carl Peterson is on. He is our chairperson. I am committee woman for that party, and Ramey is committee man. And as a county, we came together and we talked about this. Why Senator Maher would send such a letter without ever consulting the 5 schools that are on this reservation. So that's something that we're working on too, because he did not consult with tribal leadership. He did not consult with the tribal education agency that we have on the reservation before sending this letter. And it goes against the wishes of the majority of the people here. So that's something to also keep in mind, is that a lot of times Native people are pushed out of legislative districts, and we are really left living with the consequences of gerrymandering. It's real, it's happening in South Dakota. We live it. We have someone who's elected that's not representative of our people's values and our people's wishes and wants. So thank you all for listening. I'll turn it over to Ramey.
I'm unmuted now. Yes. Okay. Thank you, honey. You made a really great point. When we talk about Senator Maher's letter to regarding action civics and things like that, I find it interesting, especially when you look at his district. I've been thinking about it, and I was looking at the district. Senator Maher has 2 reservations in his district. Of all the secondary educational institutions in his district, I believe they're all tribal colleges. So there's no consequences for Senator Maher to take this action against the state simply because there's no, how is that going to affect the tribal colleges? But I think going back to critical race theory, action civics that Senator Maher brought up in his letter. There's a lot of misinformation about jurisdiction between the state and tribal governments, and I think that not teaching that also plays an important part in a lot of the mistrust and a lot of the way that citizens of South Dakota treat tribal governments. And when you look at things like today, I don't know if anybody has been following it, but today the United States Supreme Court came out with a ruling that about what the tribal police can do. And Saylor versus Crow Nation on Highway 212, which is a highway that runs through Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, the Crow Nation Police Department stopped the non-member, arrested him, who was I don't know the details of the case that well, but I know that the individual had possession of firearms and was found to be under the influence of methamphetamines. But he tried to argue that tribes don't have the ability to stop him because he's not a member, and it's a U.S. highway. But the Supreme Court unanimously ruled today that tribes absolutely have the right to stop anybody on any highway within the boundaries of their jurisdiction if they're looking out for the health and welfare of their of the people. And I think something like that should be taught in school. Something like that should be taught to residents of any state that has a reservation, because that's part of the I don't that critical race theory or the action civics that that would have taught that to a citizen of the state of South Dakota, or a citizen of the state of Montana, or any citizen that has a state that has reservations in it. So I don't know. I don't know the right question to ask, but I really wanted to know from Mr. Neseba's experience, does that have value? Does that have more value than not teaching these things in high school or a secondary institution? And are you aware of the ramifications of this, what the governor is trying to do on tribal colleges?
Yeah, I think what the governor is trying to do is simply trying to chill this conversation. That I don't think what she's trying to do is enforceable, but she is intimidating and making it clear what she thinks is welcome and not welcome. I mean, at some level, I think that faculty do not give up their First Amendment free speech rights when they walk into the classroom, and neither do students who want to have a conversation about something. So just even trying to enforce some sort of thought police in our universities is difficult, right? I mean, these are the sorts of things that Orwell was writing about, right? That this is deeply problematic. And Orwell thought that, it was the Soviet Union that we were talking about, and totalitarian governments that were telling people what to think and how to think about them. And so it's definitely chilling. And it's also sending a message to say that these ideas are not welcome on our campuses. So, and I don't know what it's saying about our tribal colleges. I don't think she has that much jurisdiction or say over what they're doing. And again, I could use a lesson on trying to understand even the relationship between state government and sovereign tribal governments. A year ago, last June, we were supposed to have an International Legislators Forum in Bismarck, and I'm on that steering committee. And we were going to have a series of speakers, and that was going to be one of the talks, because it was the International Legislators Forum is made up of North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Saskatchewan, and Alberta was getting ready to join us. That this is an issue of how federal and sovereign governments get together, and that legislators both here and in Canada still, struggle to try and make sense of those. So I think there's a lot of education to be done about that. And I think it is so hard to be able to figure out where the boundaries are, whether this is critical race theory, or are we just teaching what's sometimes called history, right? That's part of it, is just understanding it. So there's so much more we could do to understand the role of race in our history, and to engage, and it's so much more we could do in terms of civics. As well, of getting young people engaged and getting people generally engaged in government.
Elena, did you have a question?
I just wanted to, I guess, inform everybody that when we started or in the early stages of the Oceti Sakowin caucus, one of my first assignments, as a writing with my columns from the party was to reach out to the newly appointed Secretary of Education, Tiffany Sanderson. And I reached out to her office. She was just appointed, and I asked her, what are your thoughts on the Oceti Sakowin Essential Understandings and legislation to create Oceti Sakowin schools that was brought up this legislative session and last legislative session. And there was no answer from her office. So I reached out again, and the answer was, oh, she's busy this week. Can we get back to you? And I said, you know what, that's fine. I'm willing to work with the schedule. And then I asked again, and they just would not comment on what her views were with the Oceti Sakowin standards and Indian education, because that was part of it too. What are your views on Indian education? Because I don't know if you guys realize that Indian education was moved from the Department of Education and put under the jurisdiction of the State and Tribal Relations Office, which is really odd to do, because then you're just kind of generalizing Indian ed with Indian issues instead of it being under the Department of Education. So it seems like to me that this has been, this is not a new thing under Noam's administration. It seems like this has been months and months in the making, that we've now come to this, and what Noam's tactics are. So I don't know if you guys have any opinions about that. Senator Nesseba, if you have an opinion about the Oceti Sakowin education standards and how you view that, and what your thoughts are on Ms. Sanderson. Thank you.
Yeah, I do like Tiffany Sanderson and trust her more in terms of education and standards than I do the governor. I think she's tried to be less political, although she was cited in the sort of the press release statement that came from the governor as well. But right, she should be reaching out, and so I do think it was a bad move to move tribal education out of the Department of Education and over to tribal relations. There was some conversation during session of trying to move that back, and that has not happened. I know there's conversation still ongoing about that, and then we've been talking about Oceti Sakowin and being able to have school districts having more latitude to be able to bring those cultural values into being within districts. And what's clear is that Native kids are dropping out of school, that we're failing Native kids as a system, and that we need to figure out how to do a better job of keeping kids in school, helping them meet the requirements that they need to meet to be able to graduate from high school. And what we're currently doing is not working. And so I do think we need to allow for more experimentation in terms of helping Native kids get through, getting through middle school and high school. Did I answer your question? Okay. Kevin Costigan is asking more difficult questions. Most of my remarks tonight have really been aimed at thinking about this as a professor, and in part because I'm a professor at Augustana, that the governor's letter was directed to our board of regents, and telling the board of regents to investigate whether any money is being spent on teaching critical race theory. I think it is more problematic, or it is hard at what happens at the K-12 level, that those decisions are made by local school districts in terms of what's being taught in the classroom. I don't think you can sue a teacher for teaching something they don't agree with. I think that there would be ways to ask for a teacher to be removed if they're teaching something that is untrue. Critical race theory, I think, is a whole agglomeration of a bunch of different ideas, but I think the fundamental thing is to just looking at institutional racism, not somebody being overtly racist, denying somebody a job, or denying somebody job or education, or treating them differently on a one-to-one basis, but ways in which systems as a whole let people down. So again, my area of expertise is writing about financial markets and institutions. And there is a long documented history in the US of redlining. That's not controversial, it's not contested terrain. There were banks who drew red lines on maps saying, we're not going to make loans in those neighborhoods because those neighborhoods are dominated by African-American people. And those lines today continue to have a legacy. Discrimination that happened decades ago continues to have a legacy of underinvestment in those neighborhoods. And it wasn't just banks doing it, right? There was housing insurance companies that wouldn't insure in minority neighborhoods, right? There were realtors. The rules that realtors had to follow said you could be thrown out, you could lose your job as a realtor if you were blockbusting, if you were introducing Black people into a white neighborhood. There was a story just in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago about an African-American woman. I think she was in DC. She wanted to take out a home equity loan and was finding that that the estimate on her house, the assessment on her house was too low. So she decided to ask somebody else to come in and do to revalue her home. But before she did it, she called a white friend over to have him be at the house when the person doing this evaluation would be there. She took out any pictures or any hint that an African-American person lived there. She called the person coming over to do what's the word? It's not assessment, the
estimate. Estimate is what they call them.
Just the estimate of the value of the home.
Appraisal.
Appraisal. That's the word I'm looking for. And so she called the appraiser and said, I'm going to be at work, but I have my brother over. So the white guy is there. And when the house is appraised the second time, it comes in $100,000 higher, right? Simply by removing any evidence that a Black person lives there. And so it's about systems. This isn't contested intellectual terrain. This is something that is fact. There's hundreds of journal articles and books documenting systematic racism that has happened in the post-World War II period. And so simply talking about that, I don't know if that's critical race theory or not. To me, it sounds like that's the sort of thing, though, that Governor Noem doesn't want anybody talking about. So I see a variety of hands up. I'm going to pause and Shante, I'll let Shante call who gets to speak next.
Yeah, Remy had his hand up first, so.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. One, I don't think it's critical race theory that's the issue here, especially when you're talking about the letter from Senator Maher. He talked specifically about action civics. And so my whole concern here is, I was looking at some of the chats and Kevin speaks to the fact that, we shouldn't be telling teachers what gets taught in schools. Teachers need to be coming up with what gets taught in schools, and parents should have a say of what gets taught in schools. But in no way should the government get involved in that, because we're talking about in one breath we're talking about critical race theory. The next breath we're talking about action civics in the letter from Senator Maher, and those are two totally different things. And so what's under attack here is the parents' ability to control or to have input in what gets taught to their kids on a school board, and the teacher's ability to teach the most information available to students. So, you know, I think I want to hear your opinion on should government even be involved in the conversation of action civics or critical race theory.
Are you directing that at me, or are you directing that to the group, Remy?
Well, I'm directing it specifically to you because I know that you're a longtime educator and working, you know, as a senator.
Right, and I don't know if I just sent this letter to Shante, but I can read you at least a paragraph of this that. And what it says in the 5th paragraph of this letter from the Joint Committee on Appropriations to the Department of Education, it says, the JCA anticipates that legislation barring certain practices, often collectively referred to as action civics or project-based civics, from South Dakota's education system. The anticipated legislation would also bar from South Dakota's education system training in or curricula infused with certain concepts often characterized individually or collectively as critical race theory. It is the intent of the JCA that applications for grants that would violate any of their prohibitions contained in this anticipated legislation would be eschewed until the South Dakota legislature has had an opportunity to consider and dispose of legislative proposals pertaining to such topics during the 2022 session. And you can hear their confidence there. We're going to take up these issues and dispose of them. And so that is they're announcing their agenda. And I just think that's deeply problematic. I think it's particularly the JCA is getting out of their lane. The Joint Committee on Appropriations is supposed to be managing our overall spending. While they're complaining about this, you know, in the last 5 years, what's happened is South Dakota is, again, our average teacher pay has, remember we raised taxes in 2016 to make sure that we weren't dead last in teacher pay anymore. Well, guess what? Last year, 2019, we were 50th place again. And then last year we went to 49th because Mississippi fell slightly below us. But appropriations should be worried more about, I would say, appropriations should be looking at our education spending, making sure that our teachers are being adequately paid instead of trying to micromanage whether somebody is using project-based civics in their classroom. So I think it's the Appropriations Committee has gotten well outside of their lane. I see some other hands up, so I'll be quiet.
Well, we are at our cutoff time. So I'm sorry, we don't have time for everyone's questions or comments, but if you have did you have a quick question or comment, Kevin?
Yeah, I was just going to say this really quickly, that I think the thing about states' interference in like what's being taught to students is it gets a little dicey, because I understand how people want to make sure that government doesn't impede on like what's being taught to classes. But what I really think is the most important thing here is that critical race theory in schools, like K through 12 or whatever, is what people are very concerned about. And you see it in Virginia. There's actually a Loudoun County in Virginia that's actually in their teachers and like their school board meetings. The parents are like, we don't want this taught to our kids. You see, comments that are being passed around. I've examined Dr. Kendi and all the critical race theory people that are out there today socially. And, there's a lot of negativity there towards white Americans or white people in general. And it's very problematic in that when you have a theory that actually lays blame or looks at people by skin colors being the ultimate value of a person, then what you do is the kids that you somewhat teach this to in classes or whatever, you're taking young kids that are very impressionable and putting some kind of thought like that in their head when they should be worrying about math, writing, reading, like skills that are to get them into schools and all that kind of stuff like that, instead of thinking them about like what their skin color is and where that's going to lead them in life or whatever. And if this was 1960, I would agree with some of what they're saying, but to say that it's actually the same as it was then is absolutely not true. There's people who are actually you know, there's many different colors and stripes that are in different positions now that 60 years ago that wasn't there. So to say, like, to have some kind of idea that it needs to be taught so forcefully, with kids now, I think it's dishonest. And actually, I was on a call with a teachers group going back 3 months ago in Canada, where they had the idea that the racism was such a bad problem. Like, you should have heard them. You thought that, like, there was an asteroid that was going to hit Earth tomorrow. That what they did is that they actually, on the call, I actually got admitted onto this call, and I wasn't a teacher, and they were pushing through critical race theory to their classrooms because without the approval of their education council in their town, in their city, and it was a major city in Canada, without approval, because they felt that, quote unquote, it was such an impending crisis that they had to do it now. And then they had another teacher who says, maybe we should put out a survey to the parents. And the person who led that group, this is exactly what they said. I swear to God, I put my hand on a Bible and said it. Maybe we should wait to the end of the year because that's going to be problematic. So not only do they not want to get it approved by the board, they want to push it through. And this is what I'm seeing is like this rush, this knee-jerk reaction. Okay, COVID hit. The guy got shot in the United States. It looked really bad on TV. People hyper-reacted. Everybody went to their phones. And next thing you know, you have this theory that comes across in all these teachings. And people have to remember, they have to stop and think about this, examine it before you rush this through to people. And you're seeing like students, you're seeing colleges, you're seeing in New York City, there was a teacher named Rossi, his last name. He just came out as a whistleblower that he argued against this, and they reprimanded him for him. They didn't fire him yet, but this is very, very new. So I think the issue.
Can I interrupt just for a second? This is not new. This is not new. We've been talking about this for 30 years. And Kevin, can you give me just one idea? Kevin, can you give me just one idea of critical race theory that you find offensive? And
sure, absolutely. I'll tell you right now. What critical race theory says that you have to look at every interaction that you go through in life as some kind of racial power struggle between you and the other person you meet or talk to, or any interaction you go through is based on race. So the idea that critical race is that's what your life is based around in every interaction. Now, if you walk around thinking about that all the time, you're going to make it so you versus them in your head. You're automatically setting up a me versus you, instead of looking at the attributes of the person you're dealing with without the visual impairment part, without you thinking just because I'm white or you're black or whatever it may be, you're automatically thinking that there's some kind of racial component to whatever you're going through. That's the problem I'm seeing of that. Instead of thinking about how you're being treated or what have you, or what was said or what action was done, you're automatically going in with that idea. That to me is problematic. And it goes against everything the liberals in the 1960s taught about, especially Dr. King. He taught the opposite of that. He said you should be judged by your actions and not your skin color.
Thank you, Kevin. But we are over our time for this evening. And I thank all of you for joining us this evening. Elena, did you have any?
I do. I would really like to respond to that. Thank you, Chante. You know, there is such a thing as white fragility. Oh, did he get off? No, Kevin. There is such a thing as white fragility. Critical race theory is not a new thing. Betty is here. She said that she is, she's one of our elders here within this meeting. And as a non-Indigenous person, as a person who's not a person not of color, I think you have to be really aware of your own white fragility, and it's not something that we are going to coddle anymore. I am personally—
He's never debated her, Dr. DeAngelo.
I'm speaking right now. Thank you.
Robin DeAngelo has never debated her ideas publicly. She's never debated her public ideas publicly, not once, not once. So that idea is her own personal view on the world. What you're using, you wrote a book, and she's using a personal opinion, and you're using that as a—
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone.
So Chante, you know, white fragility is a real thing. And you see that when we have people like that coming on to our meetings. And I thank everyone again for being here this evening. Senator Nessebar had asked you to come on this evening to talk about this because I think it's really something that, you know, everyone is invested in. This is the education of our children, the education of our young people. And I really liked what you said is that this could be an existential crisis for our universities. And I think that's something that we should be looking at as the South Dakota Democratic Party. One of the things that I really wanted to ask you tonight was, what is academic freedom and how do we as the party amplify that in our messaging? I think that's something that's really important too, that I think we should be talking about.
And again, if Kevin's no longer with us, but that is the kind of animated response that that we're going to get, and that there is the, you know, this conversation about white fragility and people getting upset about this. But again, I think intellectual freedom and academic freedom is essential to our universities, that faculty need to be able to explore new ideas. I thought that Kevin's framing of this as one particular thing is not true. It's possible that somebody would engage in a thought experiment or to use that as a lens, but there's a variety of different lenses even being used in critical race theory to just think about how do we, what is that intersection between our history and our laws that has perpetuated wealth inequality, income inequality, access to jobs, access to education throughout our history. And it's useful for us to understand that it's not just a personal thing. So academic freedom is the ability to ask questions that some people might find inconvenient or even be offended by. And that's why the university system was set up in a way that it's less true than it used to be, right? As we have more adjunct faculty teaching in our universities, both public and private. But the system used to be that faculty go through a long probation period. Basically, you have 6 years of teaching and research and service, and then you're evaluated and you're either granted tenure or you're fired. And the idea is that at the end of that period, that you have inculcated the values of the institution, the commitment to trying to ask questions and discern at least lowercase truth, trying to understand how the world works. That's just an essential part of how we make progress and how we understand. That's how, whether you're talking about science or social science or humanities, that's been the long tradition, and that it's problematic if there is somebody from the outside saying you can't think about that or you can't ask that particular question. So thank you for asking that.
Well, thank you, Reynold. We appreciate all of your insight. And thank you everyone for joining us. Sorry about that little technical difficulty, but I would like to have Remy close us out with some good words. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to see you next week.
Paloma, Chante, Elena, everybody who is part of the Democratic Party, who's part of the Ochete Shakoi, for putting this on. Reynold, thank you so much for the work that you do for the state of South Dakota. I know it's hard work that you have to do. I know that it's an uphill battle. And also, again, the most noble profession in all of history is teaching. And I appreciate the work that you do to mold our young citizens of the state and our tribes when they come across your path in the classroom. So I really appreciate that. I think the most important thing to take away from today is that if we don't teach everything we can, then we're going to get misinformation. We're going to get miscommunication. And the bottom line is, if we don't teach everything that we can, we're going to get ignorance about each other's issues, about what happened in the past, to make better decisions moving forward. So I really appreciate everything you said tonight. This is a conversation that could go on for a lot longer than the time we have tonight. And for all of those who will view this video, thank you for watching this. We hope that we were able to give some wonderful insights for everybody today. And thank you for everything that you've done for us so far. And we look forward to the good work that you're going to do for everybody in the future. So can't wait to work with you one day on something other than our Oceti Shakoi stuff. But as always, before we leave, the final words from Mr. Nesuba.
Again, it's an honor to be here. I'm really glad that you have started this Oceti Shakoi caucus, and I think that this is the future of the Democratic Party. That we need more of this. I know that JP is working on an LGBTQ caucus. I could imagine us having another kind of rural or agricultural caucus as well, and that we need to keep moving forward. So 2022 is going to be here before you know it. So so thank you all for the good work that you do, and let's keep up the good work.
Idami everyone. Good night.
Wapila.